We're going live. Good luck, everyone. Good morning, everyone. We're just going to let some more people come in before we kick off this webinar. I think we can start. I'm just asking on chat where people are tuning in from. Good morning, everyone, or good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being here with us today. Today, we are going to cover the most important topic of all, ultimately, water. And as with many producers that we speak worldwide, water is always their main concern. So today we're bringing a twist to this topic. We've had a series of webinars on the topic of water management, both in the vineyard and in the winery, but today we're bringing a tweak because we have two researchers with us. So we're bringing this is the research edition of water management. But before we dig into the topic itself, let me first of all thank Jihany, Hervé, Helena, and Kees for being here with us today. Jihany will be hosting this talk and she will be introducing all our amazing guests today. But let me tell you a little bit of the protocol because we never know if you're joining in for the first time. So sorry about this. Ultimately, we are a global wine community sharing knowledge to address climate change. And when I'm talking about knowledge, I'm talking about very practical knowledge. We are about solutions and best practices. We have a community of more than 250 companies around the world, not only wine producers, but other companies spread across the wine value chains, from universities to retailers, importers, packaging companies, design agencies, technology companies. And what we are building is a network of people sharing knowledge for peer-to-peer learning, but also having these companies share what they are doing to address climate change. So when you have a challenge, when you're looking for a solution, you don't have to do the path all on your own, and you will have someone within this community that has done it for you and that you can learn from. So this is an invitation to join us, and I do hope you do. Just head to our website, do contact us, and I hope you join this growing community of like-minded people and companies. So I'm seeing that we're having people from all over the world, from Pietro, from New Zealand. And in fact, today we have several continents just in this set of panelists today. But without further ado, Jihany, the stage is yours. Good luck. And I'm going to disappear from now.
All right. Thank you, Marta, for that introduction. I'm also a recent member of the Porto Protocol Foundation, and it's been a lovely experience. I've just shared my screen. Can we just get a confirmation that everyone is viewing the screen all right?
Yes.
Yes, great. So let's get started. So as Marta said, today's a research edition that we're hosting. I'm Jihany. I'm tuning in from Stella Pietro Vineyards. We're situated in the Serra da Mantiqueira in southeastern Brazil. I'll be your host and moderator for what promises to be an insightful and engaging discussion. So a brief intro here. We know we're all speaking of, climate change and its significant impact in altering rainfall patterns, which present both challenges and opportunities for viticulture. So on one hand, we've seen shifting precipitation regimes, whether through prolonged droughts or unpredictable heavy rainfall, which of course can stress vines, impact yields, and increase the risk of disease. Water scarcity can lead to reduced vine vigor and compromise grape quality, while excessive rainfall can cause erosion, nutrient leaching, and fungal outbreaks. On the other hand, in some regions, changing rainfall patterns are offering benefits, such as extending growing seasons, improved water use efficiency, through adaptation strategies, and the potential for viticulture in previously unsuitable areas. So adapting to these changes requires innovative water management practices to ensure that the long-term vineyard resilience and sustainability is in place. The Protocol Foundation has been actively creating valuable content on water usage, both in a vineyard and in the winery, recognizing its critical role in sustainable viticulture. And in this special research edition, you'll have the leading experts and practitioners to explore how vineyards are adapting their water management strategies in face of climate change. So with that said, I'm honored to welcome on behalf of Protocol Foundation our distinguished guests. We have Dr. Hervé Quénol, climatologist from France's Centre National de Recherche Scientifique, Professor Dr. Kees van Leeuwen from the Institut des Sciences de la Vigne et du Vin in Bordeaux, and Miss Helena Manuel from Herdade dos Lagos in Alentejo. So just before we get started, I will invite you all to actively participate by submitting your questions in the Q&A box. You can find it at the bottom of the screen. We will also try to weave them into our discussions whenever possible, and any remaining questions will be addressed during the Q&A at the end of the session. Okay, so thank you for joining us. Let's get started with our opening question addressing all of our panelists, and we'll give themselves an opportunity to introduce themselves. So here we go. Water is a critical resource in vineyard management, especially in the face of climate change. To set the stage, could each of you briefly share how your work intersects with the challenges of water management in viticulture? And then I'll go ahead and see if we could start with Ms. Manuel from Herdade dos Lagos.
Just let me connect. Hi, good morning, everyone. Just to introduce a little bit of myself and the place where I work. I'm Helena. I'm the responsible for the operations in the Herdade dos Lagos. I risk to say that Herdade dos Lagos has been for more than 45 years a pioneer project in terms of sustainability and biotope recovery. This farm belongs to a German family that for more than 45 years tries to improve the ecosystem. The farm is located in the south of Alentejo in the Mertula municipality, and we have more or less 1,000 hectares. It's a big area, but we have 32 of vineyards, 80 of olive grove, 270 of carob, and the rest is about 600 hectares is pasture and forest for our sheep. The whole farm is in organic production, and more recently, since 10 years, we are inserted also in the sustainable program of Wines of Alentejo. I always like to show a graphic, the next slide, Jihany, please. To show our situation, why we are here speaking about water management in viticulture, is because of this mainly. I always say that Mr. Zeppenfeld, when bought the farm 45 years ago, was a visionary in terms of adaptation to the climate changes, because he demanded to plant as much trees as possible and save as much water as possible inside of the farm. And you can see now why. If you realize from 83, this is a graphic from 83 until now, 24, and you can see the tendency lines of rainwater and temperature. So we are obviously having less and less rainwater, and we have an increase of the average temperature in the farm. These are figures from the farm. Just for you to have an idea, we are more or less like the north of Africa values. 2015, we had 215 millimeters of rainwater. So this is our challenge in water management in viticulture, is what we have to do to save as much water as possible. I think we can skip to the
All
next
right.
one.
Thank you, Helena. A pleasure to
Thank
have you
you.
with us. Kees, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. Happy to be in this webinar. So my name is Kees van Leeuwen. I'm professor at Bordeaux Sciences Agro, which is part of the Institut des Sciences de la Vigne et du Vin, at the ISVV Teaching and Research Center in Bordeaux. So I'm based in Bordeaux. My research topic is terroir. Terroir involves the effect of the soil and the climate on the quality and the style of the wine. And the water status of the vine is very important in terroir expression. In fact, water status is a major driver of terroir expression, and you need water deficit to have a good terroir expression. So the terroir does not express well if water is available in unlimited quantities. Of course, you don't want very severe stress either, but you want moderate water deficits to get optimum terroir expression. So my research is about soils, climate, and in the center very much about water status, working on indicators to measure the water status, but also evaluate the consequences of those water deficits on grape composition, primary metabolites, secondary metabolites, and also wine quality and style, including aroma compounds.
Amazing. Happy to have you on board. Hervé, Dr. Quénol, let's have you introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, this invitation and the organization of this webinar. Look, my name is Hervé Quénol. I'm Geographer-Climatologist, working as senior scientist at the CNRS in France. And my research focuses on analysis and modeling of climate at local scale in a climate change context. And my work is a part of a multidisciplinary project, for example, with the team of Kees, and to define strategies for adapting to climate change at vineyard scale. And the integration of local climate variability into climate change scenario is essential, particularly in terms of temperature and water resources. That's why we develop different methods based on in situ measurement and modeling for water resource management in vineyard.
Great, thank you. Hervé, welcome. Okay, so we'll get started with asking some questions that go a little bit more into the details of the topic. I'll start with Dr. Van Leeuwen. Could you elaborate, please, on how do water constraints influence the terroir expression of wine, which you just mentioned earlier, and what are some of the key findings from your research on this exact topic?
So as I said, water deficit is a very important driver of terroir expression. And I think, Jihany, you can pull up a slide because I've compiled some of the research findings in one slide. And so if the vine meets water deficit, the shoots stop growing. And to produce high quality wine, it's actually very, very important that you have shoot growth cessation before veraison. Because otherwise, during the grape ripening, there's a competition between the ripening of the berries and the shoot growth. So we need water deficit prior to veraison to have the shoots stop growing. Another effect of water deficit is an impact on the berry size. So the water supply to the vines is actually a major driver of the size of the berries. And once again, water deficits prior to veraison have a major impact on the size of the berries. And this is really substantial. For instance, if we grow a lot of Merlot in Bordeaux, and in a vineyard without water deficit, you can easily have berries which are 1.8 to 2 grams. And under water deficit conditions, the berries of Merlot will typically be between 1.2 and 1.5 grams. So a reduction in berry size often between 30 and 40%. And this is very important for the quality because the phenolic compounds in the berries are very much related to the berry size. And the smaller the berries, the more tannins and the more color anthocyanins in the grapes. And this is very well documented. So there is just a graph between the relationship between the intensity of water deficit, which was assessed in this assay with delta 13C measurements. Well, I will not go into the details of the method, but if you can see as you can see on the scale of the anthocyanin concentration, without water deficits on the left part of the graph, you can have anthocyanins around 1.2 gram per liter and anthocyanins as high as 2.6 gram per liter. So variation from simple to double in the situation of water stress. More recently, we've also discovered that water deficit improves the aromas in the grapes and in the final wine. And this is in particular evident after some years of bottle aging. So the aromas which develop during bottle aging are very much related to the level of water deficit that the vines met during the grape ripening. And we've shown this for red grapes, and another team, including Simone Castellarin from University of British Columbia and Stefania Savoy from Italy, they showed that it is also true for white wine. So moderate water deficit also improves the aroma composition of white wines. Of course, the drawback of water deficit is that you get lower yield, which is obvious. If you have smaller berries, then the yields are lower. So the message to retain is that water deficit improves the quality of the wine, except, of course, in cases of too severe water stress, but it reduces the yield.
Very interesting. So for those of you coming in a little bit later, just a reminder, if you have any question relating to any of the slides presented or any of the concepts explored, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box or into the webinar chat. Dr. Kees, that's a very fascinating study that you have just presented to us, this correlation, this relationship of the impact of water deficit onto the quality of the wine. I'll go ahead and pop a question here for Hervé in regards to global water shifts. So Hervé, if you could please elaborate for our audience here today on how these global shifts in water cycles are affecting viticulture. I know it's a very broad question, but I believe that you'll be able to narrow it down for us as it pertains to the topic. So
Yes.
please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that the effect of climate change on the water cycle are highly variable, both spatially and temporally. And they are not only caused by the effect of climate change, but also by land use, changes in land use and withdrawal of resources, particularly irrigation. And in this picture, you can see the changes observed in the water cycle are characterized in particular by a significant increase in agricultural drought in some parts of the world, notably in Western Europe and Mediterranean region, as we can see in this picture with the orange hexagons. And regarding future changes in the water cycle, the next slide, please. Simulations are mainly based on numerical modeling, in particular the IPCC's future precipitation simulation. And the trends show strong spatial and temporal variability on a global scale. For example, in this picture, under the median scenario from IPCC, SSP to 4.5, there is an increase in the seasonality and of rainfall, with an increase in precipitation in winter and a sharp decrease in summer, particularly in Southern Europe. And more generally, we can see that many subtropical regions that are already semi-arid will face a further decrease in precipitation in most seasons. So the next slide, please. And this is the case for the Mediterranean region, California, South Africa, Chile, Argentina, and Australia. And our whole semi-arid climate will become even more arid in a warmer climate, which will obviously pose problem for water resources for viticulture. And some regions are affected by seasonal rainfall increases, particularly in summer, which can have a negative impact on viticulture, and particularly with the increase in the intensity of extreme weather events. And this, yes, it's just a summary of the shift of a global water cycle in the world.
Thank you, Hervé. That was very encompassing. I'm going to kick back to Dr. Van Leeuwen. And after you answer this question, I'll lace in some questions that we're receiving in the chat as well to go into more detail. So what we're doing now is we're going to downscale a little bit in vision. So we're going from a global perspective, and we're going to look down at the vineyard itself. And the question here, Dr. Van Leeuwen, is how can wine growers balance maintaining the typicity of their terroir with the need to adapt to increasing water scarcity? And along that line, we have a question here in the chat where Marcus is asking if we can define the quantity that is defined by water deficit in your answer. What would be an optimal amount and distribution of water stress to produce the high quality grapes? So if you can attempt at answering these two questions together, I think that would be great.
So in terms of the intensity of water deficit, it's not easy to answer that question because it depends a little bit on the objectives of your production and also the type of wine you are making. So if you're in a situation that you need high yields for profitability because you're selling your wines for a low price, of course, then you need a little bit less water deficit because otherwise you will not reach your yield targets. But if you are more in the top-end market and you sell your wines for a good price, then you can afford to have lower yield, and then so you can accept a higher level of water deficit. There's also a difference between white wine and red wine because water deficit is promoting tannins and anthocyanins in grape skins, and we need anthocyanins and tannins to make good red wines. Generally, the ideal level of water deficit is greater than for red wine than for a white wine. Now, there are several metrics to measure the intensity of water stress, but well, some of you may be familiar, if some of you are producers, you may be familiar with things like pressure chamber measurements to measure the water potential of the vines, but I think this is not the right place to go in so much detail. But if some of you are interested, I can send some papers on the topics about the ideal levels of water deficit for the highest possible quality depending on your situation. Now, if we consider the water at the plot level, then it's important to consider that the water status of the vines is defined both by the climate, the soil, and the vine. And water is in fact a cycle. And we can even model the water in the system through water balance modeling. And so, Jihany, if you can push on to advance the slide. Yes, okay. So here you can see that the climate component is, of course, the rainfall, which will join the parcel, which is sort of incoming water. But there is also outgoing water, and this is defined by the evaporative demand. So the evaporative demand is the amount of water that the atmosphere can hold, and it defines and it defines the level of transpiration and evaporation. Then the soil is another very important compartment because the soil is a sort of storage compartment. The soil can hold a significant amount of water, which is between 100 and 300 millimeters. That's the storage capacity of the soil, depending on the rooting depth and the soil texture. And here, rooting depth is very important because the deeper the rooting, the greater the access of the vines to water. And then the water from the soil, of course, is absorbed by the vines and goes back to the atmosphere through transpiration. So this is a cycle. Now, if we consider the water in this cycle, so here you can see the levers with which the growers can play to modulate their water status. So we need to be very much aware that on the one hand, we need water deficit to produce high quality wines. So in some situations in rainy climates, you want to increase the water deficit. And for instance, you can do that by increasing the planting density of your leaf area, because then you have more transpiration, and the transpiration will empty out the water reserves in the soil. But in other situations, you may want to avoid excessive water deficit stress. And so if we look at the soil compartment, if we want to limit the risk of excessive water deficit stress, a very efficient way is to promote deep rooting, because deep rooting is a way to increase the water holding capacity. In other words, the access of the vines to soil water. And this can be done, for instance, by deep soil preparation prior to plantation, or by the use of drought-resistant rootstocks. Lower planting density is also a way to reduce the transpiration and to save water. And so that means that the water which is available in the soil will last for a longer time if you reduce the transpiration at plot level through reduced planting density. Regarding the vines, which is very important, is to use drought-resistant varieties. And the traditional varieties in dry areas were used to be very resistant to drought, like Grenache or Carignan. Also regarding training systems, there is an historical training system, which is the Gobelet bush vine, which is very resistant to drought. And of course, in ultimate situations, you may need supplementary irrigation. But I'm very much insisting on the fact that if we want to save water, of course, dry farming is the most efficient way to dry water, because even with smart irrigation, you will use more water than if you dry farm. Now, there is, of course, a limit for dry farming, which is about 350 millimeters of rainfall per year. So the vine is a very drought-resistant species, but there is a limit. If you have less than 350 millimeters of rain per year, then you cannot cultivate vines in a commercial way without irrigation. But if rainfall is higher than 350 millimeters, then with all these adaptations, so promoting deep rooting, drought-resistant rootstocks, adapted training system, and drought-resistant varieties, it's totally possible to dry farm your vineyard, which is, of course, the best way to reduce your water footprint.
Very insightful. Thank you for that, Dr. Van Leeuwen. We have a question here that perhaps you can address as a closing to this thought, and then we'll come back to your follow-up question down the road with Helena, Miss Jessica Villat. Jessica's asking if you have any anecdotes or references to research that has been done on the relationship between animal, whether it's livestock or wild animals, and their integration in the vineyard, in positive consequences on soil hydration.
No, I have no anecdotes on this topic, and I know it's an interesting topic to introduce animals in the system, but I think this is more to animals will, for instance, have a big impact on the availability of nitrogen because of their dejections of containing nitrogen, but there is not a big effect on the water. No, this is not introducing animals is not a major lever to improve to change the water status of the vines, because once again, and I insist very much on this, that we need water deficit. So you can lose quality both because you have not enough water deficit or because you have too much water stress. So the objective is to be in the right bracket, having water deficit without having excessive water stress.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to a slightly different concept here, a research concept that Hervé has used in his research, which is the concept of geoclimatic analogs. So the question here, Dr. Quénol, is how can research findings like those on geoclimatic analogs be translated into actionable strategies for wine growers?
Yes, and before to talk about the geoclimatic analogs. Just a few words to explain the concept of climate analogs. This concept, the concept of climate analogs matches the proposed future climate of a region of interest with the current climate of another region according to different future scenarios. And climate analogs are generally calculated using precipitation and temperature data. And sorry, the next slide, please. And as you can see in this picture, this figure shows that climate of Rome, in Rome city, could be similar to the current climate in northern Algeria by 2070, according to IPCC median scenarios. This is the concept of climate analogs. And in a recently submitted project by Kees and other colleagues, we follow this approach at the vineyard scale by developing geoclimatic analogs for dry farming viticulture. And sorry, next slide, please. And the geoclimatic approach, considering climate considering climate like a climate analog, but also soil type, grape variety, and cultural practices at fine scale. And the aim is to have for the same grape variety, one site characterized by the hot, warm, temperate climate and another by a cooler climate. For example, in this table, we can see that for Syrah, the two geoclimatic analogs are Vineyards in California and the Rhone Valley. And we apply this approach. And this climate analog based on geoclimatic approach allows to draw on the agroclimatic experience and viticultural practices of the wine growing region whose current climate will always correspond to the future climate of one of the other sites. And by specifically including the question of water resources and adaptation practices, the simulation aims to determine sustainable viticulture areas. And the main objective is to develop a typology of cultural practices for non-irrigated viticulture in order to establish the best management practices for sustainable viticulture in different types of climate. And yeah, and this is this concept that we can use and develop in research projects.
Would you like to add some few additional words on this slide, or how it's illustrating the concept?
No, yes, it's this in this slide it was the same. It's just to show an example of the model that we can use. It's a multi-criteria model when we combine the local climate, the water balance, the phenology modeling to define different type of itinerary for the future.
So this is an interesting example of how we can use complex models in geographic information systems to help us get down to a very detailed also result for each vineyard parcel. So thank you so much, Dr. Quénol, for this elaboration. So we have a lot of questions here on the chat, and they're all great questions. I will lace a few in here with Helena. Helena, at Herdade dos Lagos, you've implemented innovative approaches to water management. And I do hear through the grapevines that you create water in the vineyard. So could you please walk us through some of these practices and their outcomes? And I'll pause here and there to add some of the questions from the participants as well.
Well, create water, syntropic farming calls it soul water, basically. It's not my sentence. I'm here more on the practical side, not on the researcher side. I'm just here to show what we have been doing here, because it rains less than 350 millimeters on Herdade Lagos most part of the years, at least since 10 years on our records. What we have been implementing is not only one thing, it's a multiplicity of techniques. We have to combine several techniques. Most of them we have already heard here in the last presentations, but we have mainly to focus in the soil protection stopping evaporation, retain water from rain. It's very important to increase organic matter content in the soil, for example, install cover crops, and also improve the quality of our irrigation systems and monitor, use new technologies to know as much as possible what we are irrigating. In terms of soil protection, for more than 15 years that we have been sowing cover crops. Initially for mulching, now we have changed a little bit the procedure. We only roll the cover crop to protect as much as possible the soil. We have been inoculating also the soil with many biodiversity like trichoderma, mycorrhizas to help us also to improve the absorption of nutrients and water in the plant. We have been using more and more direct seeding, stop destroying the soil, basically is that we want to do that. To avoid evaporation, to stop evaporation, we have been planting for many years, shade curtains with high tree, with bushes, and also with the cover crops, like I explained. Also, in some more critical areas in the vineyard, we have to have shade nets because we have, just for you to have an idea, it's very common to have a summer with 42, 45 degrees and the farm is very windy. So imagine what happens with very high temperatures and a lot of wind. Everything burns. I remember always 2018 that we lost about 30% of our production with sunburn. Was 3 days with 45 degrees during the day and 40 degrees during the night. The plants never had the chance to refresh. Besides that, we protect a lot the water. We have filtering islands in the dams. Just for you to have an idea, we have 6 dams in the whole farm. We only irrigate by night to avoid evaporation. We try to get the dams deeper as possible to have less mirror of evaporation in our dams. With this, we try to create as much as possible microclimates with moisture in the air. And this, we need shade and we need soil protection. Like I said, we have 6 dams and we try to direct all the flow channels to the dams, because now we have also the scenario of it's less and less rain, but episodes of a lot of rain concentrated in time. So we have to have the strategy to keep that water inside of the farm for the future to use in irrigation. We have also water breaks like the picture shows. This is in more areas where we have more danger of erosion. So we create water breaks that canalize the water into the vineyard, stops erosion, and also the water enters directly in the crop that we want. We use key line techniques. We create this in some new plantations, the system of ditches and small hills to canalize the water to the plants and also to save as much water as possible inside of the vineyard. Our soils are very hard. These are rustic soils, very shallow skeletal soils, poor in organic matter. So it's very important also to improve the soil and increase organic matter content. To increase the organic matter content, we have been using all the previous techniques that I explained. Also, we produce our own compost inside of the farm, and we buy every year. This is a big investment that we do for the future. We buy every year many tons of organic matter to incorporate in the soil. I believe it's common sense. Everyone knows that increase of humus retains 1% retains about 60 millimeters of water in the soil. So we want to have sponges in the soil, sponges of organic matter to retain as much water as possible. And I'm showing here some examples. People don't believe. Usually when I show this in some seminars, they don't believe, oh, in Portugal, it's not normal. You cannot have, at least in your area, 4.65% of organic matter in your soil, but it's possible, it's here. And we try to make at least the same spot of analysis every year to monitor the increase of organic matter. In 2003, this block of Aragonês had 0.75% of organic matter, and nowadays with all these combined techniques, we achieved 466% of our organic matter. This means more or less the potential of retain about 604 cubic meters per hectare. It's very important for us because when it rains all together, like happened these last days, it's very important to retain all that water in the soil. Also, we have here in the last one, sorry, Jihany, in the last one, we have here the examples of last year, some examples that to show that most part of our blocks are now in a very nice, comfortable situation, at least 2.2% of organic matter, but our objective is always to increase more and more. More techniques to save water. Like it was already explained by the two colleagues, use more adapted plants, rootstocks adapted to drought conditions. We try to have them more and more. We are always trying to research in many nurseries all around the world what they are doing in terms of drought resistance. We have planning now for the 2026 a new plantation, and we are now preparing more and more Portuguese adapted varieties with a good rootstock for drought resistance. Also, it was very important in the last 10 years, we have been renewing more and more our old irrigation systems because our main pipes had a lot of leaks, so we don't want to lose water. We want to save and not lose water also to the neighbors or to evaporation. And also we have been implementing a lot of new technologies, we have been using watermark devices. They are very simple and very simple to use and to monitor the pressure chamber to measure the hydric potential in the vineyard. We have been using for a long time. And this year we installed also then the meters in the vineyard, also with the meters and automatic probes to all combine together. We can know in real time what the plant is consuming, if the water that we are pumping arrives to the sector, if we are not losing water in between in the irrigation system. So I don't have the figures yet of this new system, but I can show you only with the watermark and the meters that we were measuring and all the hydric potential and human work, because it's very important to go to the vineyard and evaluate the growing of the plant. It's possible to show that we reduced from 15 to 17 a lot, for more than 50% of water consumption. And we are trying to reduce more and more the irrigation in the vineyard. In the last 3 years, we increased a little bit because we had also new plantations, new plants. They demand a little bit more water in the beginning, at least to promote the growing of the root system. But then our objective is also decrease again to the normal levels. I really would like to have consumptions about 1,400 cubic meters per hectare, but it's very, very hard in this place. So as you can see, this is not only one technique, it's a lot of techniques combined together to resist to the climate changes. We are having the desert from north of Africa coming to Portugal, so we are trying to fight that.
Thank you so much, Helena, for all these insights. Helena, we have a specific question here for one of our audience members, and they're asking, I don't know if you'll be able to address it, but if you have any data that you've been collecting around competition from cover crops that you've planted in the vineyard, especially in the drought conditions, right? So does the reduced soil temperature and evapotranspiration balance competition for water? And yeah, so they're asking, how is the cover crop doing in relationship to the vineyard, and how are they co-inhabiting there in that same space?
I'm not a researcher. I don't have figures, numbers for that to show that. I just have these examples of reduction of water consumption, but it's obvious when we install it. I can tell some examples of cover crops that we have been applying in the vineyard. It's obvious also when we take out during the summer some parts of the grass. It's obvious that we still have moisture in the soil. And without any moisture, the temperatures are huge in the soil. And with the cover crops, they decrease very, very much. It's proved. There are researches everywhere about this. I believe for me, it's no science anymore, because this is obvious. We have to protect the soil with shade to create more moisture in the soil. So, of course, in some parts of the cycle of the cover crops, there will be some competition with the vineyard, but in my opinion, it works the effort of protecting all and retain all the water in the soil. Just some examples. We try to seed as much as possible leguminosas mixture. About 80% of the mixture. I usually don't buy a ready mixture to the soil. We adapt every year. That's also a very important thing, a technique thing, that you have to see what is in the place. If the last year seedings, they didn't result so much, we have to readapt again, introduce new species. But here the objective is have a multiplicity of species, like a lot of clover. For example, we use many red, white, Persian, subterranean clover, Phacelia, for example, buckwheat, mauve, some brassicas that we use also to break the soil, because it's a very, very hard soil. We need some deep, strong roots to break the soil and to create that effect of canals, a sponge. We use also some lucerne, some serradella, melilotos, faba minor, for example, you have here in the photo, works very well to nitrogen fixation in the soil when you have blocks that needs more nitrogen, or you see, for example, in the grapes that you have a lack of nitrogen. So it's important to use these cover crops, for example. Also, we use 10% of the composition of the mixture with the bee meadow mixture. It's to attract benefit organisms, and strong flavored herbs like coriander, for example, many herbs that we mix together. So this is also a combination of several species. I can also share more. We have been buying, and also in Germany, some mixtures, in Portugal, some mixtures, but in the end, I prefer myself to buy isolated species and combine myself into the farm, because I know now in our type of soils what works better and resists better to the drought.
Thank you, Helena, for that. Kees, do you have any insights on around competition from cover crops and drought conditions that you'd like to complement?
Yeah, so there's not a straightforward answer, because on the one hand, the cover crop competes for water with the vines, because the cover crop will use some water. But on the other hand, the cover crop also competes with the vine for nitrogen, which reduces the vigor of the vine. So often when you use cover crop, the vine will transpire less. So it depends really on the situation, that sometimes the increased the transpiration of the cover crop will compete with the vines and will induce more water deficit, and sometimes the reduction of the vine vigor and also the increase of the organic material in the soil, so under cover crop the soil can hold more water, will reduce the water deficit. So there's no straightforward answer. Another thing is that you can possibly destroy your cover crop during the season. So generally in the spring until April, May, early June, there's enough water in the soil. So even if the cover crop consumes some water, that's not a big issue. And if the water deficit arrives in the season, you can possibly destroy your cover crop. So there's so many options with using different species or destroying the cover crop or not destroying the cover crop, or having 100% of your ground cover or only 80% or 50%. So there's no straightforward answer. Like Helena does, you just need to play around with that option. It's a very interesting option for the growers, but yeah, it's just a matter of practical expertise, and sometimes even research cannot address those questions because there are so many possible options that once again there's no straightforward answer.
Thank you so much for that compliment. I'll move along to a question more relating to technologies. So what role do emerging technologies or sustainable practices play in mitigating water scarcity in vineyards? And along that, you know, if there's any past learning, so what can we learn from the past that you guys like to complement? That would be great. I'll pass on to Dr. Quénol. Perhaps, Hervé, you can address a little bit about the equipments that you guys have installed in your research in vineyards, you know, in certain region to receive the data sets of temperature and rainfall at a finer scale. I think that's something we barely touched on and is very interesting.
The network of data logger, for example.
Exactly, yes.
Yes, but the aim is to analyze and to measure the spatial variability of the climate at local scale with several indicators that we can calculate with the temperature, for example. And it's very important to integrate this local variability into climate change model. And I think it's one very important topics for the future. And for your question about the sustainable practices, I think sustainable practices to mitigate water scarcity in vineyard can only be positive. Dry farming is a perfect example. And today, agricultural irrigation accounts for some 70% of the world freshwater withdrawal and 90% of water consumption. Even if viticulture accounts for a small part of this high percentage, it's necessary to develop sustainable practices to mitigate water scarcity in vineyard. And this example of installation of a logger weather station at very local scale can help for this. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll let Kees or Helena react to that question as well. Do you see fit?
Yeah, so I'm happy to give some more details on what Hervé was developing. So I would like to introduce a concept which is maybe not familiar to all of you. Well, everybody knows what means a carbon footprint, and most wineries are working very hard on reducing their carbon footprint. But there's also a concept called the water footprint, and the water footprint is the amount of water that you use to make your product. And so in our case, it's a bottle of wine, and it is possible to calculate the number of liters of water that you need to produce a bottle of wine. And this is highly variable. And I think we need to use more this water footprint, because if you want to reduce your water consumption, you have to compute, you have to know how much you use. And once you know how much you use and what is your water footprint, then you can work on improving it. Just some orders of magnitude. In the cellar, the water used to produce a bottle of wine is somewhere in between 2 and 10 liters of water per bottle of wine. Now, in the vineyard, in a dry farmed vineyard, it's basically zero. It's only rainfall, but no water pumped from aquifers or surface water bodies. But in an irrigated vineyard, the water footprint for the production of a bottle of wine is somewhere between 100 and 500 liters of water per bottle of wine produced. So this brings us to a very important point, that if we want to keep our water footprint low in wine production, then we need to maintain wherever it is possible to do dry farming. And I'm really a fan of dry farming, and I know that it's not possible everywhere. And I earlier pointed out the limit with roughly 350 millimeters of rain a year, under which it is not possible. But wherever it is possible, we should maintain dry farming. And it is possible in much more places than you can possibly think of. 30 years ago in the Mediterranean basin, it was already a very dry area. Almost 100% of the vineyards were dry farmed. And even in New World countries like in California in the 1950s and 1960s, California had already very dry summers. And there was a lot of dry farming. But with adapted training system, they had a head-trained training system, which is pretty close to the Mediterranean Gobelets bush vine. And with adapted rootstocks and adapted varieties, they managed to cultivate their vineyards without irrigation. Now, if dry farming is not possible, and if we irrigate, we can reduce the water footprint by using smart technologies like Helena pointed out. And the pressure chamber is really a very, very precise way to monitor the water state of the vine, and you can exactly determine at which stage you need to irrigate and how much. And we have developed thresholds for at which stage you need to start the irrigation. But with precise monitoring, we can reduce very much the water use in irrigated vineyards, and it improves the quality. But because what's actually happening in many irrigated vineyards, people are using too much water, because once the irrigation is installed, people are always afraid of the accident, not irrigating enough and having an accident. So in particular, the vineyard managers who are opening or closing the tap, generally they don't want to take too much risk. And to save water, we need to take some risk when we do irrigation management. We need to accept some risk, and maybe, it's exactly like with sprayings. If you want to have a sustainable way of cultivating your vines without spraying too much, well, sometimes you need to take some risk, and maybe some years you may lose 20% of your crop because of downy mildew. And if we want to have sustainable water management, also we need to be really at the lowest possible limit of supplying water to our vines. That can save substantial amounts of water. I was in the Terroir Congress in Mendoza in last November, and some of the wineries, just by improving their irrigation techniques and having better irrigation monitoring, they saved up to 70% of their water use. So there's an incredible latitude to reduce water use in irrigated vineyards when irrigation is mandatory. And on the other hand, we can save a lot of water to maintain as much as possible dry farming in vineyards wherever it is possible.
Thank you, Kees.
I
Helena, I don't
can
know
add,
if you...
I don't know if I
Go
can
ahead.
also share
Of course,
a little
please.
bit of our figures, because we have been measuring, at least in the last 4 years, also our water consumption in the winery, for example. We started 5 years ago with more or less 2.2 liters per bottle, and now we have 1.2 liters per bottle. So I guess our main objective is have 1 liter per bottle in the winery. Regarding, I was making here a short calculation regarding the vineyard. I believe we are not so far away from what Dr. Van Leeuwen said. We have about 350 liters per bottle in the vineyard. So, but I want to reduce. Water is rare in our region, so I want to reduce more and more. So that's why all the new technology that we have been installing in the past and now in the vineyard, and also we are always trying to research more and more what we have available to control what we are doing.
Thank you, Helena, for that compliment. There was a question in the chat by Amanju, and he asked what rootstock we are using, Helena will be using in the 2026 plantation, and she answered M2 or M4. I'm not sure this went out to everybody, so I just thought I'd bring it up here so that our audiences also on podcasts could partake in it down the road. I'll follow up with this one last question, which is, how does the panel here today, how do you guys react to the possibility of industry professionals and researchers collaborating more effectively to foster resilience in viticulture? specifically on the subject of water as a resource. So if you were to put a message out there for the world today, for researchers and vineyards operators, vineyard owners, how they could better collaborate and all the professionals involved in the supply chain, what would you say? So I'll let you guys take a stab at this one.
Maybe I can start. No one is speaking. Like this, like we are doing today. This is one of the best examples what we can combine together. My practical examples, the researching examples, and share with everyone, share all over the world, all techniques. This is a very, very good example, very good platform to share good practices, and also not good practice, because it's important to learn also with the errors. What I complain a little bit in Portugal is the academy is a little bit far away and separated from the practical side. So I really would love to have more the researcher side on my side, on the farmer side, to have more data to support all the work that I have been doing during all these years. So this is my comments, what we can do to connect with each other and to support the research.
For research collaborations, of course, international research collaborations are very, very interesting because there's so much expertise around the world and we need to collaborate. So I'm based in Europe and we need to collaborate with New World countries, with the United States and with Australia and South Africa. But I think we can also learn a lot from Mediterranean countries because there is so much expertise of growing vines in dry conditions. Now, what's interesting, in the New World, most of the vineyards are irrigated, and historically in the Mediterranean basin, most of the vineyards were dry farmed. And I see now a movement in the New World where people are getting interested in going back to dry farming. And even very famous estates like Dominus Estate in Napa is dry farming. Herdade is moving back. Herdade is one of the most expensive wines of Napa, moving back to dry farming. Hill of Grace is produced without irrigation. And on the other hand, in the Mediterranean basin, most of my colleagues in research centers, they are interested in smart irrigation. But I think there is so much expertise, in particular among growers with local varieties and drought-resistant rootstocks and drought-resistant training systems in dry farmings, that I would like to see more investigations on how can we possibly maintain as much as possible that dry farming, because there's no better way to save water than to dry farm.
Yes, the same conclusion for me. I think international collaboration between scientists and wine growers are very important for the sharing of knowledge and develop a solution for water management in vineyards. For example, in the Geographer-Climatologist approach, an important phase of this project is to develop a typology of cultivation practices for dry farming viticulture, and using data collected from semi-directive survey of wine growers in each pilot site in France, in New Zealand, South Africa, and USA. And I think this type of example is very, very important to improve our results.
Thank you all for your insights on international collaborations and how we can do better as an industry. Given that we have a few minutes, I'm going to go through some technical questions that were here on the chat that we were not able to address previously. Ones here apply to Dr. Van Leeuwen's previous mention on water quality and wine aroma. Let's see here. So Mathieu's question asks, referring to improved aroma, would it be more linked to increased concentration of methoxyrazine and rotundone in smaller berries, or different aroma precursors? I don't know if you'd be able to address that question.
So there are many aroma compounds in wines, and there's been a tremendous progress over the past 20 years in our knowledge on the molecular basis of those aromas. For most aromas which we can smell in the wine, we know which molecules are driving those aromas actually. And there's also been a lot of research on all those aroma compounds. What are the environmental drivers of their concentration in grapes and wines? And so there's not one straightforward answer how the water status of the vine modifies these aroma compounds, because it's specific for each family. Now, I've published a review paper on this topic 3 years ago. So probably for those of you who are interested, just send me an email and I send that paper to you. Because it's not possible in 5 minutes to explain it. But this topic is pretty well addressed in this research paper. So Marta and Christina from the Porter Protocol, they have my email. So if you send a question, I will forward you those papers. And I saw another question about thresholds of water deficit, and I would give the same answer, that probably for those who are interested in those specific technical questions, I can send papers on the topic. That will be the most effective way to give you a precise answer.
Thank you. And the last question here that we weren't able to address earlier was whether the relationship between animal integration in the vineyard, if it has any impact on micronutrients in the soil. Of course it does, plant matter, water, and wine aroma, flavor, nutrients, quality. So it's a very encompassing question, but I think what we could address at this time is whether animal integration in the vineyard essentially may have an impact on the final product or on the final wine quality.
This is not an easy question to answer, because there's not been a lot of research on this topic, but animal integration in the vineyard will have the biggest impact on the nitrogen, more than any micronutrients or whatsoever. So if there is any impact of animal integration on wine quality, on aromas, I think we have to look at the nitrogen cycle. But this has never been quantified, because animal introduction in vineyards is really very recent and not yet done on a very broad scale. So this needs further investigation.
Thank you. So, team, now if you were to leave the audience with one key takeaway so we could close the panel today, what would that be? I'll let you guys each respond. One key takeaway.
I don't know if I can start. On my opinion, to save water is protect soil and increase organic matter, at least in my reality.
Yes, for me, take into account the spatial variability of water resources when implementing climate change adaptation strategy at vineyard scale, and promote sustainable practices to reduce water consumption, such as dry farming.
So for me, the key message is that plant material is a major lever to adapt to drought. And historically, people used adapted plant material. When people in the Mediterranean, they grew varieties like Grenache and Carignan and Monastrell, which are very drought resistant. But then with the advent of varietal wines, varieties like Merlot, Syrah, Tempranillo, and Chardonnay were introduced in warm and dry areas. And those varieties are not adapted. So we need to go back to those traditional varieties, but that involves consumers' acceptance. So we need to convince consumers that if they drink, for instance, a Monastrell from Spain or a Grenache from Spain, that's much more sustainable than to drink a Merlot from Spain. And I believe the wine is better. If you use an adapted variety, not only you save water, but the wine is better. So we need to move away from those monolithical varietal approach where everybody wants to drink Chardonnay and Merlot. That's so boring. And we need to go back to traditional varieties, which are much better adapted. And we can save millions of liters of water by using traditional varieties, local varieties.
Just to push here a little bit. On my side, we have very good Portuguese resistant varieties. There are so many.
Well, As we come to a close of today's sessions, then I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists for their invaluable insights here today and for sharing their expertise in this vital conversation on water management in the vineyard. My dear panelists, your contributions have undoubtedly enriched our understanding of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. To our audience, thank you guys so much for your engagement and your thoughtful questions. We invite you to explore the Protocol Foundation's extensive library on climate talks and resources where you can delve deeper into a wide range of sustainability topics. The platform offers the ability for you to filter content, which allows you to easily access water-related material and continue expanding your knowledge on this critical subject. So we appreciate your participation and commitment to shaping a more sustainable future for viticulture, and I'll pass it on to Marta for the formal closing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jihany. You were an excellent moderator. Thank you. And you were excellent panelists. This was, honestly, if water is so important, if there's one climate talk that you have to watch, this is the one. If it was really, really insightful. Kees, please share with us all the documents you shared. This presentation will also be on our website. If you go to where Jihany just spoke about, to our Solutions Explorer in our website, you'll find all the information, the presentation for today, the climate talk, as well as the research that Kees will be sharing with us. And Hervé, I'm sure you'll have also documents to be shared that we can share with the wider audience. So thank you very much. Next month, we still haven't planned on the subject, but definitely there will be a climate talk next month as well, probably with the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation that it was here with us today. So stay tuned for that and become a member. Honestly, we'd love to have more. The more we grow, the more we can tackle this together. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Oh, Jihany has disappeared already. You were so great. Thank you very much. This was a perfect format with the practice and I'm glad, Hervé, in case that you mentioned that you wanted a third guest as a practical one, because this was really, really good. It was so insightful. I've learned so much. So thank you very much for this. It was amazing, for sure.
Thank you.
You learned so much. All right. Thank you very much. We can go.
Thanks.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Helena, I'll call you. Okay.